For our next set of speakers, and just to say a little time check, settle in. We thought we would end by 6, but I think the sharing and all the way it's going will probably be more like 7. So cancel those dinner plans and just settle in, because it's going to be, one of these remarkable once in a lifetime, because it is once in one person's lifetime experience. And just to also celebrate, I brought along my friend, Thimbley. Thimbley was a Dakin prototype that was named, who has a little bit of a heartache. His heart is broken. But he came to me from at one of the Dakin Christmas parties, auctions, one day, and we were riding back in the car with Henry and Sue, and I had just won this bear in the auction raffle. And I said, well, the only problem is I don't know what to name him. And Henry said immediately, his name is Thimbley. And some things you just don't question. So Thimbley said he had to be here too. So 25 years later, he likes to stand upside down and do tricks. So you're all welcome if you need a little bear hug at some point today. Thimbley is hanging out right over here and ready for hugs. And maybe he was another one of those characters that Henry named and knew and hung out with, like Cutter and Catcher and the others, the ghost. So the next person you're going to hear from is someone who more than anyone epitomizes the remarkable work that was done between the U.S. and the Soviet Union through the auspices of the 3220 Sacramento and all the amazing projects Henry was involved in. I don't think I've ever met anyone who could think. Well, you say think outside of the box isn't big enough to think as big as Joel Schatz thinks. He thinks outside of the universe. And he and his wife, Diane, really set the pace and the level of possibilities for things that could happen that were unique and wonderful. And I have a specific challenge to you, Joel, because I was asked a couple of times, how on earth did Henry get involved in the Soviet Union in the first place? So, and I'm sure Joel can tell us amongst some other great things he's going to share. So please welcome Henry's lifelong friend and incredible innovator, Mr. Joel Schatz.
This is just an extraordinary day. Just the sheer turnout speaks volumes about Henry. I met Henry about 26 years ago. I was introduced by Don Carlson from the ARC Foundation. Many of you knew Don. Don was supporting us in our early work creating email with the Soviets, but he didn't know anything about technology. He says, you have to meet Henry Dakin. So I called Henry, and I made an appointment to meet him in his Washington Street office. I went there, I opened the door, and here was Henry on the floor on his back with no shoes on, under a table wiring computers. I asked, are you Henry? He says, yes. Well, I said, Don thought you might be interested in giving me some financial support. He said, okay. This is completely true. He said, how much do you want? I said, $5,000. He said, okay. He wrote me out a check, handed it to me, and said, here, goodbye. He crawled back under the table. I asked him, would you be interested to know what this money is going to be used for? He said, not right now, I'm busy. I left the office and I called Diane and I said, you will not believe what just happened. I am so happy we moved to California. So I visited Henry a few days later and I said, actually what I'm trying to do is create a commercial electronic mail link between the Soviet Union and America. He said, that's a great idea. I'll give you an office, we'll furnish it, we'll give you equipment, and we'll give you a grant to hire some people. I didn't ask him, he just volunteered that. So we began our work, and it was just an extraordinary thing that happened because every day Henry would come to the office with more ideas, more office supplies. He was completely proactive. The company grew quite successfully, and then we opened an office in Moscow. And then Henry, to show one of the playful sides of Henry, did something that was a bit outrageous. He decided to inaugurate our Moscow office by bringing the largest version of the Coco stuffed gorilla to Moscow to give us some advantage over our competition, I suppose, in Moscow. He actually flew, I think it was Lufthansa, and he didn't want to check the gorilla, he wanted to have it as carry-on. And as it turns out, there was an unsold first-class seat, and the cabin attendants fell so in love with the gorilla, they actually flew Coco first class all the way to Moscow. How he ever got through passport control and customs carrying this gigantic gorilla is a real mystery to me, but somehow he managed to do that. And Coco was a real success. Well, the company continued to grow, and it attracted the attention of George Soros, who had a foundation in Moscow. And George says, you know, this is such a good company, but it's a non-profit, and to really make a huge dent in the Soviet system, you need hundreds of millions or billions of dollars of money to build real international phone systems. So why don't we convert this to a for-profit company? And I thought, well, okay. And as it turns out, in order to transfer our client base and our equipment from Henry's Washington Research Institute into a for-profit company, we had to pay Henry back all the money that he gave us, which to us was just a sheer joy. To recycle that money back around so that Henry had a new source of capital to fuel his continued philanthropy. And as it turns out, we were so successful at 3220, we thought we'd start another company, which we did, a software company, with a lot of help from Henry. And when you form a company, of course, you can issue founder stock to anyone. And just to repay Henry for his incredible friendship and help for so many years, we gave him some founder stock, not knowing if it would ever have any value. And then in the year 2000, we were surprisingly acquired by a publicly traded company. And there was another source of money for Henry that came out of the original meeting that I had with him when he didn't want to even find out why he gave me the $5,000. I love when money circulates like that and just keeps moving around where everybody wins. A couple of small memories about Henry. His curiosity to me was just astonishing. Once he asked me to fly with him to Nebraska to explore some innovative new technologies. And as our plane was lifting off from SFO, he pulled some strange gadget out of his briefcase. I asked him, what is this? He says, well, it detects cosmic radiation. I said, okay. He said, you know, as the plane lifts closer to the vacuum of space, we're exposed to more and more gamma rays, and I want to see how accurate my device is compared to the altimeter on the airplane. So as we're flying higher and higher, it's clicking away. Finally, the sound stabilized. He said, there it is. A moment later, the pilot says, we've just attained our cruising altitude. And he said, see, it works. And he put it back in his briefcase. It took me years to realize there was nothing I could ever imagine about Henry that would not be unpredictable. Once, a fond memory, Diane and I were swimming at Leonard Lake with Adriana and Rose and Julia, and Henry walked onto the dock fully clothed. It was a beautiful day. And the girls asked him to come for a swim, and he said no. And I'll never forget, he said some obscure things. He said, I don't really like nature that much. It doesn't have a plot. I said, okay, but Henry, wouldn't you like to go swimming with your kids? He said, okay, and he just jumped in, completely clothed, to the delight and surprise of his daughters. Another very small memory about Henry's public speaking skills. Once there was an event of a congressional delegation at the penthouse at 3220, and we went around the entire room introducing ourselves, and it came to Henry's turn, and he said, my name is Henry Dakin, I'm the building manager. And I jumped in and said, that is the longest speech anyone has ever heard Henry make. You know, the problem in trying to summarize a relationship with someone so extraordinary as Henry is that the range and variety and depth and sincerity of his spirit, of his intellectual capacity, his generosity, and above all his humility is just, you know, goes beyond anyone I've ever met in my life. The Russians loved working with him because he was so honest, so straightforward, so helpful. I still recall all the events at 3220. What would Henry do? He'd bring all the chairs out and set them up. He'd bring the catered food. He'd wire all the sound system. He'd clean up afterwards. He'd arrange for valet parking. He loved doing all this hands-on stuff. It just made him feel like something that was important for him to do because somebody has to do it, so why not Henry? And besides, he didn't want fame, publicity. He didn't want accolades. He just wanted to get things done. And to work with someone like that for so many years, to me, was just beyond extraordinary. Well, it turns out, David Hoffman mentioned earlier that, you know, his interest in paranormal psychology and everything. I had a twilight moment experience with Diane the day after Henry passed. We were driving in San Anselmo and my cell phone rang, and I looked at it and it said Henry Dakin. Now, I could hear the Twilight Zone in a split second, music going on. Not that I really thought that was Henry calling, but for a split second I thought, if anybody could ring my iPhone from the other side, it would be Henry. Diane, the phone kept ringing, and Diane said, "Are you going to answer it?" I said, "Hello?" It was Rose. Actually, a week before Henry passed, I called him, and we had the most extraordinary conversation in our 25-year history. The full range of subjects, from cosmology to science to politics to the future of human civilization. He was very upbeat about his condition at that point. And I remember telling him how much I loved him for what he did for me and for Diane, for everybody he knew. And he thanked me in a way I had never heard him thank people before. It was just an extraordinary time. In all the years that we experienced Henry, that conversation was just, to me, truly extraordinary. What more can I say? I know that I've been asked to speak for 5 minutes. I've gone over that. That would be 1 minute for every 5 years that I knew Henry, which is kind of a challenge. So I guess suffices to say, bon voyage, Henry, my dear friend. We send our love to you to the far reaches of eternity.
And now we're going to hear a selection from Lisa Eldridge. It will be a Roulet Sonata on flute.